Alrighty, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, depending on your time zone. I'm in Mountain Time, so I still got an hour to go here before lunch, but thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. Excited to get started in just a couple minutes. Alrighty, I'm getting the green light, so let's go ahead and kick things off. We are really excited to get together today for the second installment of our 1099 accounts payable webinar series. So this is the payments track. We're going to be talking today all about how to make contractor payments accurate, fast, and reliable. And just as a reminder, this is part of a 3-part series. So we have 3 separate tracks covering onboarding, payments, and 1099 compliance, which kind of encompasses that full life cycle of the 1099 contractor. In case you missed our onboarding webinar 2 weeks ago, we do have a link to that we'll be sharing with attendees to this webinar as well. We encourage you to check that out. The 1099 compliance webinar is coming up in 2 weeks from today. So if you're interested in that, highly encourage you to register for that event as well. And Kerri was gracious enough to put together a blog recap, for that 1099 onboarding webinar that we did in mid-July. So please do check that out. We'll share the link, but it's a really great way to get a quick read on kind of key takeaways and what we covered in the first track of this webinar series. Just to cover a bit of housekeeping, we've got a handful of slides to walk through today, kind of covering those core themes, and then at the end we'll go ahead and do a Q&A session. So if any questions come up as we're moving through this content, feel free to submit them right in the Livestorm UI, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. Now, a bit about the folks that you are talking to today, or listening to, I should say. My name is David Henry. I'm head of marketing here at Wingspan. I am joined by Kerri Florian. She's our resident accounting expert. She leads accounting for Wingspan as a company, but she also brings a wealth of information working both on the client side through consulting engagements, but also full-time for businesses as well. So she brings a really unique perspective, having worked for over 100 companies in an accounting finance capacity. So really excited and appreciative, Kerri, for you to be joining us today.
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second seminar. I'm so excited to have everybody here and see that a whole bunch of my fellow peers and colleagues have joined us today. Hopefully this next 20-30 minutes will add some value to your day.
Great. Thanks, Kerri. I want to set the stage at first and kind of differentiate between this notion of contractor payments and contractor payroll. Payroll is obviously something that we associate with full-time W-2 employees, so it might feel kind of out of place talking about it in terms of contractors, but I think it's actually a really important distinction to think about. What do these contractors, especially 1099 independent contractors, what are their needs as human beings? What are they trying to accomplish? And how might approaching contractor payments more from a payroll lens actually be beneficial to their experience as a contractor working for your company, but also your ability to work with them in a really streamlined and efficient manner? Kerri, I'm curious from your point of view, especially on the accounting side of things, how do you differentiate between these two terms, and how might you recommend folks listening in today think about it?
Yeah, when I think about payments, I think about vendors, I think about companies, corporations, businesses, and when I think about payroll, I think about human beings. I think about people needing to pay mortgages and needing to buy groceries. So, they're a little bit of a different lens for me.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. As a W-2 employee, I know exactly when I'm going to get paid forever in terms of the date that I'm going to receive that payment. Obviously, the amount will vary throughout my career, but I think that's an important way to think about it. And today, we're really going to focus the conversation around why accuracy, speed, and reliability, especially for contractors, is super important as they, achieve their financial goals, as they manage their finances, as they manage their business, et cetera, and finding different ways to unlock that for contractor workforces when they're a really important part of the way that you operate as a business. On that point, let's start to peel apart kind of this notion of accuracy and what accurate payments actually mean for contractors. And we've kind of broken this across three different aspects that I think are really important to keep in mind. The first is visibility for the contractor to actually know what they're getting paid for. I mean, this seems like table stakes, but I know that the kind of ebb and flow of a finance team can change depending on the week or month and kind of what's being managed at that time. Invoices can get mixed up, hours can get mixed up, things like that. So just providing visibility to that contractor, it's really valuable for them so that they understand what they're getting paid for, what's outstanding, et cetera. So then it comes down to like, okay, how do you actually make that possible, and how do you make sure that you are connecting into that system of record that has the actual invoice and billing detail, and providing your team with a source of truth so that they can make those payments accurately for that contractor without a kind of bunch of questions from the contractor, which kind of brings us to our last point around transparency for account payable teams, so they can simplify that reconciliation and dispute resolution process. And a lot of times these disputes aren't necessarily malicious. It's just like, hey, I thought this was going to be, $1,234 and actually it's $1,100. Like, what's the situation there, and how do we make sure that I'm getting paid the right amount? Kerri, I'm curious from your perspective, like, what are some examples where you see this play out for accounting and finance teams?
Sure. Yeah, there's going to be times where a contractor hasn't submitted their hours on time, but they still need to get paid out on the field. There's going to be times where, you have 2 out of 3 invoices, so you could be paying them a little bit differently. There's also going to be times where, you are just paying them and then reconciling it later on after the work is done. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and it's not always clear.
Yeah, I think that clarity is super relevant here. And we've got a quote from a Wingspan customer, Keith Diamond at Portastic Tastings. They are essentially a food and beverage marketing company. So if you have, the person pouring Chardonnay in Costco, that's a good example of what their workforce might look like. That person's going to be working on a contract. And one thing that he pointed out was that if contractors don't get paid, we're done. If they don't get paid on time, we're in a lot of trouble. And this is particularly true for businesses where they use contractors to provide revenue generating services. And obviously for Portastic, that's going to be kind of front and center. But I think it's important to ground out in why that really matters for contractors and how managing this differently can have really significant downstream effects. And we're going to dig into what a couple of those look like in a few slides here. But I want to focus the conversation first on this notion of speed of payment and what fast actually means for a contractor. One thing that comes up all the time with our user base is this notion of instant payments, but also flexible payout methods. So ability for a contractor to get access to their funds sooner rather than later, but also just making it easier for them to actually get the funds out of your account or out of your payment method and into the way that they run their finances and run their business. And I think a part of this that really comes into play here is the cycle time between processing and approving those invoices. Kerri, I know this, I'm not always the best at this on my end, and I know that can lead to strife for accounting teams. Can you help us understand that process in particular and how that can impact the speed of payment for contractors?
Sure. I mean, sometimes you have a whole bunch of invoices out there that you're waiting for approvals on, and I can't make a payment till I get that approval done. So the contractor in the meantime is waiting and asking, when is their payment coming? And I don't have a valid answer for them because I'm not sure when somebody's going to get around to being able to approve it. So it can slow things down when you have certain structures in place like that.
And what's the solve there? Is that like an internal process where you just need to run more rigid SLAs around the invoice approval process, or is that an area where automation could lend a hand?
Both, for sure, both. Yeah. It's just, having people understand that, approvals need to be timely, having a system where you can easily approve things, where you're not just looking for an email, waiting for an email approval to kind of staple onto the invoice per se, and being able to move through things a little bit more quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And then the final piece is using electronic payment methods to ensure fast transactions. And when Kerri and I were working on the content for this webinar, paper checks came up, and I can't remember the last time I was paid with a paper check, but I know it does happen. Kerri, can you help us understand the instances where a paper check might make sense, and kind of more importantly, how to really build your payment infrastructure around this ACH to ensure that you can process those payments quickly?
Sure. I mean, there's not many people who want to be paid by a paper check these days. But what happens is, going back to our first lecture for the onboarding. So if the person hasn't been onboarded quickly and I don't have all of their relevant information, like their bank details, the only way I can get them paid is through a paper check. And, snail mail is still snail mail these days.
Yeah. And I'm kind of curious, especially when it comes to onboarding, because for the folks that weren't on that webinar, we essentially covered what is the kind of core process that you need to undergo from an onboarding perspective. What's the checklist that you need to keep in mind? And a big part of that was getting PII, also getting banking information, and keeping that in a secure, referenceable location. I'm curious, Kerri, in certain instances where you need to mail that paper check, where are the delays actually taking place, and how can you help streamline that?
Yeah, I mean, the delay is taking place right at the start, right? When I'm not getting that banking information right from the beginning. And if I'm sending a paper check, there are AP systems that will still help you send out a paper check. But, in other circumstances, it's literally printing out a check, getting a signature and sticking in an envelope. That's just way too manual, way too time consuming in this day and age.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of on that point, we put together a few different statistics around why instant payments are really important, and oftentimes a lifeline, I should say, for contractors. And there's a few things I want to point out here. The first is that contractors actually prefer, and this is not earth shattering, right? But they prefer weekly or biweekly payments just so that they can better kind of organize their lifestyle around them. They also prefer the option for instant payments and would even pay out a percentage fee to access those funds earlier. And I know a lot of vendors don't offer this type of functionality, but Kerri, how have you seen instant payments handled in past lives, and how should finance teams approach that?
Sure. I mean, one way that people have handled it is through advances, which get really messy and are hard to reconcile. There's a chance of making a double payment later on. There's a chance for some confusion as to what you were paying when you pay that way. I've also seen, using PayPal or Venmo, but you can't do that at scale. When you're paying 100 contractors and you're trying to find John Smith number 7, or was it number 8? There's a lot of risk in paying the wrong person at that point in time.
And how does that say you're doing some ad hoc instant payments, like where that is applicable, what's the implication on closing books and having an auditable paper trail? Because I know when you start to get into some of these consumerized payment tools, they can technically send them money, but the kind of finance and accounting aspect of that kind of falls off. So how have you seen that play out?
Yeah, for sure. Because, when you're paying somebody out of a Venmo or a PayPal, you're not paying the invoice per se. You're just sending a payment. So the payment is now disjointed from the invoice itself. But, unlike an AP system where you pay the invoice and it's kind of connected and automates to your system. So having that all in one function is the best way to go about it.
Cool. That's super helpful. And then let's peel apart reliability. We've hinted on this a little bit with the previous slide around kind of weekly versus biweekly payments, but reliability, I think a lot of times just comes into knowing or having predictable increments for when those contractors are getting paid. And I think for different businesses, it's going to play a different role. So in some instances, got lost in the vortex for a second. Sorry about that. In some instances, you might be paying, a contractor out for a very small unit of work that maybe they're doing on a daily basis, on a monthly or on a weekly basis, something like that. A good example would be some of our telehealth clients that have live messaging, right? So you might message a therapist online, they respond to that message, they have a payment method associated with fulfilling that level of service. And in those instances, it might make sense to just pay those out on an ad hoc basis. But I think too, rolling those up and tabulating those payments over time so that you can process them in predictable increments is really, really beneficial for the contractor themselves. And the goal here is that they just want number one, for it to be easier to do business with, but also they want a close relationship with the clients that they're actually working with. Obviously, as independent contractors, they're going to be working with different clients at the same time. And there are instances where you might have higher demand at a certain period of time. A good example of that would be claims companies during catastrophe season or during hurricane season, when suddenly they can have a ton of claims ramp up. They want to make sure that that contractor wants to do business with them and that it's really seamless. So
Hi, everybody. I'm going to take over for David here for a moment. So just continuing on talking about reliable payments and what I've seen in this, contractors with the relationship, when you pay them fast and you pay them reliably, they're going to want to work with you and come back again. When you're, if they have to wait on their payment, if they're checking in with you, you're not going to have the best relationship with them. So it's really important to get that going. We're also talking about things like working with, reliable sources for getting there. The banking world has been through a little bit of tumultuous times right now. So you want to make sure that the payments are coming from a really reliable source. Having that reliable source will get the contractors to understand, that their payments are coming from a viable place and they can trust. Again, it's a lot about trust in that area. Let me talk a little bit more too about, from the accounting side, when we are making reliable payments and fast payments, this helps us close the books at the end of the month. We can get all the information that we need to be able to reconcile everything, right? When you have your invoice matching your payment, everything is going to be moving smoothly. And then, once these payments are going smoothly to the contractor, you're going to get a lot less people contacting you to ask you where their payments are. And, mentioned it before, when you're waiting on that approval and you're not really sure what to say, it's helpful to be able to then give that information to the people. So maybe we can move on to a couple of online questions. Let's see if I can get some questions here. Okay, there seems to be a question from Matt. What do you typically include in a contractor's payment schedule? Milestones for partial payments, final payments upon completion, any repayments? Yes, those are all good options, Matt. Thank you for bringing this up. When I'm thinking about making a schedule, you're going to have different circumstances. You're going to have some contractors that are going to be needing to meet certain milestones, and so you'll have to pay that way. You'll also have other ones that are getting the payment at the final completion of the project. Again, we'll have to go back to the onboarding and being sure that you have all that information to be able to correctly pay them. We have another question from Adam. What are the most common mistakes I see on contractor payments? I would say some of the most common things that I've seen, and we've also heard from some of our customers, is just paying the wrong amount because you're adding something manually. A transposed number doesn't look good. Having just not a clarity about what you're paying for. Again, I brought this up earlier about circumstances where you have received 3 invoices and apparently there's a 4th out there and you've paid 3, so somebody's not clear of exactly what they're looking for. Hi, David. Welcome back. We took a few questions while you were gone. We can hop back to where you were.
Sounds great. I apologize for that. I think Chrome decided to take a break. So sorry about that. Give me 1 second here. Let me pull back up our slides. Okay, where were we? All right, my apologies. I'm glad I could get back here. So as we were talking about predictability around payments being really easy to do business with, and I think too, one thing that's top of mind for a lot of our clients is that they partner with a contractor payment or contractor payroll solution that has really solid banking partners and really reliable payment infrastructure. It's lost on no one that having reliability on that front is critical. No one wants their payments stuck in limbo. No one wants their contractors to lose access to funds. And we encourage folks that are considering different payment vendors to really scrutinize the quality of the banking partner. Are they tier one or are they a smaller regional, et cetera, so that you just basically de-risk that overall for your business. A really important part of reliability. No one obviously wants to deal with an outage. So we take that very seriously at Wingspan as a really key part of the service and product that we offer to folks. Sorry, I fell off the face of the earth there for a second. All right, so let's dig into, Kerri, we didn't cover this question, did we?
We talked a little bit about we can pay contractors on a regular schedule, but let me just give a couple more pointers there. One thing that people can do is using a system that pays contractors like Wingspan, or you can set up recurring payments in different AP systems, and that works okay. And another important thing is going to be getting a regular schedule and working with that contractor and what that looks like and setting that expectation. Are they going to get paid weekly, bi-weekly, and making sure that you're able to put that in place on your end.
Thanks for the insight there, Kerri. And then could you walk us through some of the instances where payments might go wrong and kind of pitfalls that teams should think about avoiding?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this, but some of the things that have come up that I've seen that I've done, is delays in payments. There's some of our customers have come in to us because they are paying so many contractors. Their business runs on contractors, and they have just two people trying to, run through making all of these payments, setting them up, and trying to be as efficient as possible. But it's hard sometimes, right? When you have so many, and then you're looking for that information to be able to make the payments. And, there's that fear and risk of the inaccuracy where you could transpose a number and such.
Yeah, for sure. And then what is kind of the plus side of doing this right? I think is always like an important thing to grind out on, because on one side of things, like your day-to-day as a finance team is going to be better, but there's actually very tangible business outcomes of streamlining your payment processes and driving automation ultimately through this process so that you are not stuck in the perpetual cycle of manually processing, manually calculating, manually sending, manually reconciling, and then manually communicating with each contractor. And we've kind of bubbled those up across a few key metrics to keep in mind. One is just going to be dollar saved in terms of labor costs to facilitate those processes. There's a ton of savings upside here. Additionally, just speed of payment and getting those payments out faster, right? Directly tied to cost savings as well. And ultimately the time that you spend processing those payments on a monthly basis. And the ultimate goal here is we just want to drive down reduction in payment related errors. Because when that gets closer to zero, the questions that you get from contractors gets closer to zero, your ability to close books becomes much more efficient, et cetera. And there's just a daisy chain of kind of implications that are ultimately improved upon with better payment processing. Kerri, does this resonate with you? And how do you think an accounting team should think about the business results or business outcome of better payments overall?
Oh yeah. If I'm not spending my, hours upon hours setting up contractor payments, that leaves me more time to do other things, to jump in other places, to get the books reconciled a little bit faster because everybody wants the books closed, tomorrow or today. And so, it leaves me a lot more time to do this. And, nobody wants to deal with an unhappy person, and getting those emails from a contractor telling me that something went wrong or they're not seeing their payment. It's like, oh, geez, that doesn't make my day as well as it doesn't make their day. So eliminating that to zero is a huge, huge win.
Yeah, they're the emails everyone tries to ignore, but ultimately we know we can't. We got to make sure that payment gets out. So super helpful there, Kerri. I know we are close to at time here, but I wanted to open it up for any Q&A that we have outstanding. Let me check the system and see what we have to answer. Give me 1 second here. Kerri, did we answer the question from Adam while I was in outer space there for a second?
Let me see. Common
Around
mistakes. Yeah,
what
we
are the
kind
most
of covered
common
that
mistakes?
one.
Sorry.
We did, I believe, cover that one.
Okay. And one question from Sarah was around cash flow and payment terms in particular. And she asked, aren't longer payment terms more advantageous from a cash flow standpoint?
They can be, but if you're managing your cash flow regularly and you actually are using a schedule for making payments, that's going to actually help your cash flow. If you're, just paying things as they're coming due or delaying them and you're not managing that, that's where you can get into some issues. So if you actually know you're making 100 contractor payments on Friday versus paying a little along the way, it makes that a lot harder to do.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that, Kerri. And I'm curious, what are kind of the best tools that you've come across for handling this for finance teams?
Sure. I have to give a plug. I'm going to say I came to Wingspan because I love the product. I was really impressed with how it handles it. Outside of Wingspan, though, I've, used different AP platforms where, I am able to set up something like a recurring payment to a contractor, especially if the rate stays the same. I'm also helping them sometimes create that invoice template so I can easily pay them. Yeah. And, we're always going to go back to that onboarding, right? Where you need to get all the information right up front. So if I send a little package out to the contractor with all the information they need, I can then get all that information and then I can, go back to my good old handy Excel schedule and make sure that I have everybody down and following and tracking everything that happens.
Yeah, and I think too, one delineating factor that's important to keep in mind is, are you paying 3 to 4 contractors, or are you paying 3 to 400, or maybe 3 to 4,000? Because we actually had a customer come in that was using Tipalti previously for their contractor payments, and they were a telehealth company. They were paying literally so many that the system broke down in their ability to service that volume of payment. So I think too, the total size of your workforce is when certain kind of secondary solutions that can technically do it, but not quite very well, start to break down a little bit, and is something to keep in mind as well. That wraps up our session for today. Thanks again for joining us. In 2 weeks, we'll be covering our 1099 compliance track. So please do check that out. We will share the assets that we went over today and links to everything that we discussed with the attendees. But thank you so much, Kerri, and thank you so much, everyone,
Thank you, David. This was
for
fun.
joining us.
Look forward to the third one.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.